Hello, welcome to Blue Radio. I'm Lisa, and each week we discuss some of my favorite recordings. I invite you to listen to the songs, however you like, as we go along. This week, we will discuss Peggy Sue. One night in July 1957, in the small town of Clovis, New Mexico, Buddy Holly and the Crickets were set up inside the recording studio that was owned by Norman Petty. The studio, located on West 7th Street, was very familiar to Buddy and the boys. After all, they had been working there with Norman for a few months now, and were quite at ease with him and he with them. In fact, Norman had begun to act as the Crickets' manager, and as such had recently placed one of the boys' recordings with Coral Records, a label out of New York. The disc, the A-side of which was written by Buddy and called That'll Be the Day, had been released 6 weeks back on May 27, but was making the slowest climb imaginable up the charts. Tonight, the plan was to record 3 of Buddy's new compositions in hopes that at least one of them would make a stronger showing than That'll Be the Day was doing at present. Besides Buddy on lead vocals and lead guitar, the Crickets were Jerry Allison on drums, Joe Malden on bass, and Nicky Sullivan on rhythm guitar. However, Nicky does not appear to have played on this session. Norman himself is the engineer and, by default, producer. They began the session with a song entitled Cindy Lou. It had been rehearsed as a cha-cha, 1-2 cha-cha-cha, and as such, the first few takes were not setting anybody on fire. Some changes were in order. First, it was suggested to change the name of the song. What's wrong with Cindy Lou? Possibly nothing, but Peggy Sue was drummer Jerry's girlfriend's name, so he thought that was cooler. Buddy liked the sound of it, so he agreed, and Norman was probably for anything that would change the mood in the room, as nothing was catching anybody's interest. Next, it was decided that a different rhythm would better serve the tune. Jerry started playing a set of 16th notes on the small tom. This was nothing more than a pattern which he would normally use to warm up. Joe on bass went to straight quarter notes, the perfect rhythm to add to what Jerry was doing on drums. On guitar, Buddy instinctively goes to 8th note strums. Drums, 16th notes, the bass, quarter notes. So what does that leave? 8s, of course, so the guitar fits just right. And with all this, suddenly it was all a lot better. Let's roll tape. The straight nature of the drum part would have begun to get monotonous, so Norman came up with the idea of closing down the reverb effect, which he had added, every 2 beats, thus giving this rhythmic instrument more of a melodic feel. It makes the drums sometimes sound dry and closer in the mix, and then wet and farther back in the mix. He continues this effect throughout the record, but with sectional variations. We will discuss them as we go. That guitar sounds as it does because the high cut filter on Buddy's Fender Stratocaster turned all the way down sounds very woolly. Nobody ever uses it, but on Peggy Sue, Buddy chose to use it, and that woolliness somehow sounds good. Here's the first verse. It is a 3-chord harmonic structure, a blues progression really, but with a lot of energy. It is a simple lyric rendered with an amazingly brash vocal performance. He's got a sad story, and he surely isn't afraid to tell us about it. Verse 2, Buddy begins to inflect the vocal. The bridge is only a slight variant in chords and melody of the verse, while lyrically similar yet simpler. A borrowed chord, F major, is thrown into the key of A, the song's key. This chord change is unusual for rock and roll at the time, and it gives the song a much-needed harmonic difference. And somebody there knew, probably Buddy and probably Norman too, that you can't just bang out verse after verse with no variant while expecting the listener not to lose interest. Verse 3, more voice inflection. The second item to note at this point is the timing. It does not change. Despite the difficult task of maintaining those 16th notes on the tom, Jerry keeps the tempo. Good job. Now the guitar solo. No technique, all emotion. A melodic performance but played strictly in chords. Simple, yet brilliant. It fits, and it is unique. There is a story that goes, when it came time for the guitar solo, Buddy couldn't change the pickup switch from rhythm to lead without leaving a gap in the performance. Nicky Sullivan, who wasn't playing the session, suggested that he sit nearby and flip the switch on Buddy's Stratocaster when it came time for the solo. The problem with this story is that if you listen closely, you can hear both guitars, lead and rhythm, playing together. On top of that, the solo sounds as if it was recorded separately. There is a room sound down it that is not present on the bass or on the dry drum signal. In other words, it was an overdub. And although the solo is mixed a little too hot, Buddy Holly has just played one of the coolest guitar solos of all time. Another item to note is that Norman takes the reverb all the way down on the drums for the duration of the section. The drums needed a variation, and Norman provided it. Bridge 2, another bridge with Buddy changing his performance, then the ending. Last verse repeats the tagline, however, on the repeat, Buddy drops down an octave. Perfect. Embracing the rule of all solidly arranged records, both that repeat and Buddy's vocal lets you know that the record is ending. As for the final notes of the band track, it almost sounds like a splice after the upbeat of 2 of the last bar. However, I do believe that it was performed. Norman pulls the reverb all the way off the drums, which fits the abrupt ending. Unusual because when music stops, it almost always does so on the downbeat, usually the down of 3 or of 1. Like this, 1 and 2 and 3, not 1 and 2 and... See, it sounds like it stops in the middle of something. Now let's talk about this vocal performance. What Buddy does on Peggy Sue is to give each verse and bridge a different inflective mode. The question is, was it planned? Or was it spontaneous? A number of young male singers were in the business of copying the way Elvis modulated his voice, and most of them didn't have a clue about how to do it. The first requirement is an excellent ear for music. The second is that you had to be absolutely fearless. Buddy understood all of this completely. Every line of Peggy Sue is unique and thereby made interesting. Conclusion. What started as an unsophisticated cha-cha record became a record that is an icon in rock and roll history. I would make that trade any day of the week. When you look at any career in pop music, there's always one record that makes the difference. It might not even be the most successful of that artist's works, but it is the special one. Peggy Sue came out in late summer and went straight to number 3. There was no waiting for it to happen like That'll Be the Day. The following week, Peggy Sue went to number 1.